Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to add some more custom bits to the 3Racing X reel. Now, I'm not a fan of engine sounds rumbling away on a scale off-road truck. They're fun for a few minutes, but when you're walking around in the woods for a few hours, they do just start to grate a bit. However, I do like the idea of having a horn, and since we've got this nice space between the chassis rails at the back, we might as well fill it with a speaker box. Here's the prototype, 3D printed of course. It's got a 40mm 4-ohm speaker and a bar on each side to attach to the chassis. It's so rigid it should help stiffen up the rear end of the chassis too. Here we have the kit of bits, ever so slightly tweaked from the prototype, and I should mention designing speaker enclosures isn't something I know much about. I've built a few which kind of worked in the past, but they always sound a bit peaky. But for a truck horn, I don't think it matters that much. It's never going to be hi-fi, and as long as it's loud it'll do the job just fine. Right, the speaker itself is a 40mm 4-ohm 3-watt jobby, available in pairs on eBay for not much more than £1. There's a few slightly different types, but for this application they'll all work just fine. I tend to go for the ones with a nice smooth dish purely because they're a bit easier to clean. The speakers are of course a bit delicate, so to protect it from stones and other debris I've got a grill that screws onto the box front panel. It's a 40mm fan grill I found on Thingiverse that I've slightly modified to recess the M3x6 screw heads. Eventually it'll probably go up as a remix so it's downloadable. The back of the front panel has a recess for the speaker. It's a good snug fit, but it's going to need some glue to keep it in. It might be interesting to design some sort of clamp or screw fixing, but the speakers are so cheap it doesn't really matter. The main box is just two parts, the main bit and the side panel. They need to be sealed, so they'll just get glued together. First though, the sidebars need to go on. They're attached with two M3x8 countersunk screws from the inside of the box and the lid. The general idea is you could have different bars made with the holes in different places to fit other chassis. I'm not sure how practical it would be though, as the width of the box will play quite a big part too. We could also add a bit of glue just to make sure the bars don't go anywhere, but I found the screws really do tend to bite into the PLA material. Once they're nipped up, they really do grip. Because the top surface isn't perfectly flat, we're going to need to give it a quick rub with a sanding block. Not only will it take the small ridges down, but it will also rough up the surface a bit so the glue has the best chance of really getting a good hold. I'm going to use some Zapper Gap as it's quite thick and takes a little while to go off, so we'll have a few seconds to position the side panel. We just need to run some around the edge with a bit extra in the corners. Then press the panel into position. Now it has a few tabs on the inside, so it's partially self-aligning, but it's still going to need to be squeezed up for a minute or so just until the glue grabs. While that hardens, we can get the chassis ready. There's quite a few bits that need to be removed, so we can slide the speaker box in. First, the rear wheels need to come off so we can access the bottom damper mounts. The rear body post stabiliser comes off next, followed by the rear bumper and its mount. From the inside of the wheel arch we need to remove the lower damper screw so we can swing the damper forward and back to access the top mount screws. The screw for the small cross brace needs to come out, along with the top damper mount screws. Because the wheel arches mount to the top of the damper mount, it's not going to fall out, but the bit that the two screws screw into will. But we're not going to be needing it when the speaker box goes in. Repeat on the other side and we've got a slightly floppy but clear entry along the rear of the chassis rails. Now we've got the chassis ready, the speaker box should be solid enough to finish building. On the bottom there's a fairly large vent hole. It's going to be on the underside of the chassis, so to stop rocks and other bits getting in we're going to glue in a grill. It might be possible to print it so it's built into the box, but I found grills tend to get a bit stringy when printed on their sides. So this one being separate, it could be printed flat. It's probably just a side effect of using the absolute cheapest filament I can get hold of, but it usually works out okay. There's a step inside the box, so all we need to do is run some glue around the inside and press the grill in. It's a very tight fit, and even after shaving a bit of material off, it's still a bit of a squeeze. I'll have to adjust things before making it available on Thingiverse. Now, before we fit the front panel, we're going to need to drill a hole so the speaker wires can come out. Now, I did think of making a hole in the print itself, but if the box is going to fit other chassis, the hole might need to be somewhere else, and it's not really a big deal to drill a small hole somewhere convenient. To mount the speaker to the front panel, I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy. It's good at gap filling and doesn't emit vapours that could damage the speaker. We just need to be a bit careful while putting it on that we don't overflow and get the epoxy inside the speaker's frame. Small speakers like this tend to have 2 solder tags that we need to solder some wire on. One of them is marked with a plus, but since you've only got the one speaker, we're not too worried about the phasing. If we were using 2, we'd need to keep it in mind when wiring them up. All we need to do is tin the tags and solder a length of wire on each. It's a nice, quick and easy job. To keep the wires tidy, I'm going to twist them so they stay together. You could use a few bits of heat shrink just as easily though, but twisting does look rather nice. It does take a while to do though. To fit the front panel to the box, I'm going to use some more 5-minute epoxy. Just like when gluing in the speaker, we don't want to use cyanoacrylate due to the fumes. It's more important this time due to the enclosed space. All we do is run a bead around the step on the front panel. We don't need much, just enough to give the plastic a thin coat. Then we press it into place and hold it until it's stable. Now you could use some clamps, but the 5-minute epoxy really doesn't take long to get to the point where it's not going to go anywhere. After leaving it for an hour, just to make sure it's all nice and solid, we've got a nice little speaker box ready to fit to the chassis. The idea is it should slide smoothly along the chassis rails, but in reality it's a bit of a fight as it likes to get hung up on everything. And my choice of position for the speaker wire wasn't ideal either, but after a bit of jiggling and light bending it found its way in quite nicely. All that's left now is to refit the suspension parts, the bumper and body post stabiliser. They all go back together using the original screws, only this time they thread into the bars along the side of the speaker box. It really makes the rear of the chassis feel extremely rigid, far more so than having the small brace the stock radio box mounts do. There is one more thing we need to do though before the stabiliser goes on. We need something to drive the speaker. Now long-time subscribers will know I've made a few RC audio boards before, but I've never quite been happy enough with them to make them into a saleable product. This is the latest one, and unlike the previous ones, it can play a bog standard MP3 file, so no special faffing around making sound files compatible. Or at least that's the theory. This one is the first prototype to see how it actually works. For now, it's just going to stick to the back of the speaker box with a couple of strips of servo tape. There's no need for anything fancy at this stage. The servo tape will stop it falling off, but it should be easy enough to peel off later. The stabiliser can go back on now with its 4 screws, but before we get too far with that, it might be a good idea to connect the speaker to the audio board. I knew I forgot something. There's just a little 2-way screw terminal in the corner, so we strip some insulation off the end of the wires and clamp them in. Nice and simple. And it means the board can be removed without much fuss. Okay, now we can refit the top of the stabiliser along with the rear wheels, which just leaves connecting the audio board to the receiver. Now I'm going to use channel 4 as the first 3 are all in use. At the moment the audio board gets its power through the receiver from the Beck in the ESC. It works, but there is a little bit of an issue. During playback, the audio board, or more specifically the amplifier, tends to draw 200 to 300 milliamps, well within what the Beck can provide alongside the servos. But the amp can peak at 1.5 amps, which is a bit much when you add the current of the steering servos too. The current peak can overload the Beck by quite a bit. It's not the end of the world though. We could use a separate Beck, we could connect directly to the battery, or possibly a very large capacitor could all solve the issue. All are a bit of a compromise, but I wouldn't want to sell something that could potentially damage another part of the truck. So this is very much a one-off at the moment. So with the battery fitted, we can have a little play. The SD card is loaded with some system messages alongside some horn sounds. So rather than cryptic flashing lights, it'll announce what's happening.
System ready.
Along the bottom of the board, there's 3 buttons. A short press on one of the outer 2 will increase or decrease the volume. Remembering, the louder it is, the more power it's going to need. So for now, we have to keep in mind that we could be overloading the Beck. Holding the buttons down, we'll play one of 3 full-length MP3s. I've loaded a few in Computech bits of music, but it could be any MP3. That's all just the extras though, the main feature being the horns. I've set up channel 4 to be a 3-position, centre stable switch. Pushing the control one way gives us the typical horn. and if you go the other way, it plays a random file. Really though, to get a better sense of what's going on, we need to go outside. For the most part, the system works very well. Except when it does that. There's definitely a few bugs to work out. It only makes that noise on that one particular file, and the MP3 decoder locks up until it's power cycled. It worked fine for a while though, so I think the cheap and nasty micro SD card might be to blame. It really wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, that's about it for this week. I really need to give the truck a proper run now. It feels very solid, the suspension looks very plush, so I think it's ready. As always, thanks for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!